Yeah, so thanks everyone for joining. So let's go for a little bit of our workshop agenda here today. So the idea is that today we're gonna focus more on the new sequencing method of cmBuilder, right? So like the way that you would use our new tools to create sequences fast. So I'm gonna do a quick workflow review just to highlight some specific things that we suggest that you do at specific points in cmBuilder. Then we're going to go into how to manage your 3D model data before or while you were importing these files into your scenario, how you're going to map those models, those parts to milestones, how to sequence other elements in your scenario that it's not just your 3D models, a little bit of tips and tricks, new features, and then in the end, we're going to do a quick QA and a survey as well. Okay, so let's go to the next slide over here. So this is what I usually present to people whenever we are doing some training, right? So we start with our project creation, then we move on to our project setup stage, then we create a simulation for that project, and we collaborate towards the end of that. So like, what are the important parts that I want to highlight in these three steps over here, right? So when you're doing your project setup, these are the two main things that you need to do, right? So one is to improve your surroundings. So basically, if you do have better satellite images, better aerial images to project on the ground, you can import them. You can also import your drone scans to put in the surroundings of your area. You can import a custom terrain as well. You can create a custom terrain to fit the terrain with your survey data. And after you're done with that part of improving your surrounding, you're gonna import your references. So this is when you're gonna bring in your drawing overlay. You're gonna set up a model to import, and that can be done like right in the beginning because it might take some time for us to convert that model. And then you're gonna do a schedule import if you do have that. So I'm gonna touch base on this from here on today, right? So we're gonna start with our schedule import and then moving forward to the next steps. So one thing that I'm gonna mention is that whenever you import in your schedule, it's always good to get the both start and end dates of a major logistic change. So what are major logistic change? So the moment where you break ground with your excavation, the moment where you get out of the hole when you finish your excavation, the moment where you finish your parking levels that are on the ground, right? So the moment where you bring in elements that you're gonna start like assembling like envelopes and so on and so forth. So what are the big changes that you're gonna have? Where the moment that you're gonna bring in your hoist, your cranes, and so on and so forth, right? So the next step, the big one, is the simulation. This is where you're gonna create the work in cmBuilder. So I suggest that we start by creating some initial milestones to represent the existing conditions and the site setup stage, and then moving on to the sequence iteration, right? So these two steps are milestones that I always suggest that people do because it's important to get the references of your site captured correctly, right? So that's why I put in a bonus tip over here that you take a look around on Google Street View whenever you're doing the work so you can check interferences of your site, right? So for example, over here, this is the project that we're gonna go through today, right? So if I want to check all the references and the interferences that I'm gonna have on this routings over here, I can simply open my project page and then copy the address or the latitude and longitude. And if I put over here on maps in Google, I can see where are my fire hydrants, where are my, if there is any, let's say, overhead power lines and so on and so forth. Where are my trees and so on and so forth, right? So I can see that interferes all around over here and try to replicate that in cmBuilder by putting in all of these elements. We have elements in our library that represents all of these elements over here, all of these parts, right? So this is an important thing to do. Then we're going to go into the sequence iteration. I usually prefer to start with model sequencing. I put the model's parts into buckets. They are my milestones. And then from there, I will move on to my excavations and then populate the resources on the site and then go back to the model sequencing just to check if there's anything that I need to change because now I have a crane in place. Now I have a hoist in place. So like, do I need to change anything in my sequence, right? So this is the part where you actually doing the work of your planning. When you move on to the collaboration, you're going to create your slides for your presentation, add some markups in there, and then you can move on to the exports where you're going to push it out to other people to do, right? So the reason why I wanted to review this today is just to create that mindset of the moment that you're gonna start working with your sequencing, right? So it's at this stage over here. You can always go back and forth in any one of these steps, go back to the project setup to bring in more references, to update your models, and so on and so forth. And on this last stage over here, one quick thing that I would like to mention is that there is a little button over here. So I'm going to use a finished scenario to show that. So whenever I'm in my presentation stage over here, you usually have the play from beginning. But let's say that I want to review my simulation in my presentation from this point onwards. So instead of hitting play from the beginning so I can see everything from the beginning and then get to this point, I can click on this little arrow over here and I can play from this current slide. So this will give me a play button that I will start from that slide right away so I can work on packages, right? So work on the first stage of my construction, do a presentation for that, review that first stage, then go to the next stage and go on so on and so forth, right? So we'll save you some time by doing that. Okay, little workflow review. So let's get into the important thing for today is how to manage your 3D model data. So this is a little funnel that I created just to show that whatever you get from your consultant as a source model, you start filtering that out to the point where you're going to create a sequencing for parts that are relevant for your construction, right? So what is the most relevant elements that you want to show in your simulation, right? So why do we want to do that? Because it's easier to maintain and update the sequence. It's faster for you to create a sequence, faster loading times because you won't have like a super complicated and heavy model, and it's better performance for you to work as well, right? So our team always provide a lot of support and help on this part because not everyone has all the license of softwares out there, and also you can never control exactly what's coming from the consultants. Like there are so many different ways to create a 3D model, so it's easier to you can just reach out and ask for help at this stage. Okay, so I'm going to go through in each one of these steps. So the first step is how to filter when you have your source model and then before you're exporting from your source, right? So filtering at the source, what do you do? So the best practices that we have over here is to isolate structure and envelope first, because those are the two main things that are going to affect your sequence. Export to IFC 2x3 if possible. Section your model. You can do that in Revit and Blender. So that's very important whenever you have pour breaks and so on and so forth. You want to split geometry in two, like a slab in two. You can do that by sectioning the model in Revit or Blender. It's always good to have like the same origin point for the models because whenever you import them into Builder, you'll be able to snap them together. Reviewing a different viewer before importing. This is very important because sometimes people bring in a model into cmBuilder and they look at the model, is not exactly what they expect, but the problem might be at the source. So if you have like a intermediate point where you can check that IFC model that came out of Revit just to see what exactly was exported is interesting because it can save you some time before you import that into cmBuilder. Okay, and of course,
Pedro, I'm going to jump in here with one last thing. So, or one thing for those who don't know, some of this complexity we have in our product roadmap to allow you to split the mesh inside cmBuilder. So you'll be able to do some of this pre-processing. You won't need to do some of this pre-processing inside cmBuilder. But this at the moment is the best practice, and hopefully in the next few months you'll be able to just do this inside cmBuilder.
Yes. So these are just like a quick cheat sheet about like what is the best method to import these parts into cmBuilder. So from SketchUp, Revit, and IFC models, you can filter them and then import into cmBuilder as an IFC. From Navisworks, a native FBX model, SketchUp, or an OBJ file, you have to export that to FBX. And from Rhino, we always suggest you export that as a step file, right? So these are all the three main ways to do that. We have we suggest that you can use like a free viewer to do that kind of like checking before you bring that in cmBuilder. There are so many out there. Just put some names of a couple over here. Okay. So I'm not going to dwell too much on this conversion cheat sheet. We're going to put this on our user guide, but also it's important for you. I'm going to keep it over here just so like whenever you're watching the recording, you can stop at this point and we see the little tips and tricks that we have for each one of these model exports, okay? And one great thing to know is that Navisworks and Blender can open a lot of different file formats and then export that to FBX. So these two are very interesting softwares to have. Like Blender is for free, so you can download it at any time. Okay. So after you're done filtering your model at the source, now we have new ways that you can filter the model once you bring them into Builder. If that's an IFC file, there is this new window that will pop up over here where you can define what are the IFC classes you want to convert. So if you want to remove furniture, fittings, I don't know, fixtures, all of these things, you'll be able to deactivate them from here. And then you can do that once maybe, and you can select this kind of like checklist to create a conversion template. So that every time that you bring in a new IFC file, that you won't need to go through that step again. Okay. For FBX files, I've been getting some questions from customers about like scales of a model. So whenever you import an FBX file, that FBX file doesn't, it carries over like what is the unit in which it was exported. So sometimes when you import them into Builder, the units are not the same. So you can just go into the edit model stage and scale that model to the unit in which they were converted, they were exported. And it's always good to turn this on because it will show the materials on both sides of each surface in each mesh in the FBX. It might take a little bit more performance to do that, but at least you will be able to see all of the parts of your file. Okay. Again, contact us if your model is taking too long to convert or fail to convert. We have our logs. We usually contact the users right away. But if that's not the case, you can simply send us a message and say, hey, it's taking like 1 hour, 2 hours, like something that I should be doing differently. Let us know. We will help you right away. Okay. And then these three parts over here is what we're going to talk about today, is that how you can filter more parts of when you're mapping your parts to your milestone and how you're going to sequence them, right? So the filtering stages that we have is this new tool over here where you were able to select parts and say, never show these parts in my sequence. And that can be temporary or permanent, but also you can put them on the timelines. And our visibility controls now are temporary, right? With this new method, instead of like Javi is going to talk about this in a minute, where with our legacy method, you would create hide and show sequencing for each milestone. Now it's a little bit different, and the hide and show will be temporary, right? So I'm also going to explain a little bit about this bonus tip over here, where you can create a placeholder milestone in the future to store parts that you're not working at the moment. Okay, so enough about slides. Let's jump right into the model. We're going to explain a little bit about the legacy method. Javi is going to show that. And then I'm going to jump in and explain the new method, right? So to use the new method, I'm going to show you how you have to turn it on in our experimental feature in user settings. So Javi, you get to start showing that.
Okay, so some of you may have seen me do a demo or shown some of this in the past. I'm just going to quickly on how the legacy sequencing strategy has been. So typically what you would do is you would kind of plan your logistics and your sequencing from, say, site setup to bulk excavation, let's say, to foundation. And when you get to the part where you start turning on aspects of the model, you would find those parts inside the tree and say, okay, I'm going to execute foundations at this milestone, right? And then I would start thinking about, okay, well, what are my temporary resources I need? I might need a concrete pump truck, right? So I grab a concrete pump truck and drop it on the map, right? And adjust the parameters and build out all the temporary resources that are going to support the means and methods for that sequence, right? And then you would say, and you may have heard me also talk about how you can start to associate the resources to the milestones directly. Like say, I want this and maybe my concrete truck to show up at only the concrete or the foundations milestone, but I want it to not be there after. Or like the crane, so the fencing and the trailers, et cetera, these things are by default in there at the beginning, they stay all the way to the end, but some things show up and leave, right? So we had this ability to do this. So if I create another milestone manually, let's say if I don't have a schedule linked, if I just go here and say, podium, right? I can go back to this concrete pump truck and I can say, well, wait a second, let's define when this is going to show up. I want this only to be at foundation and leave at foundation, right? So we had this logic for the resources already in place where it's automatically gone. I go to podium, it's gone, right? My bulk excavation is gone, right? So what Pedro's going to show you is how we extend this now to the rest of the model as well. So it's not just going to be, you know, like these types of resources. It's going to be also for the full sequence. So if I want for the model, so these elements will work exactly how the resources work now, right? So now if I would turn this on in Podium and I save state, I zoom back, I got a couple milestones, right? So it's like I'm just hide showing the from the tree of the model. And there's positives and negatives of this, but one of the big negative is that if the tree is not structured very nicely, you find a lot of time digging up parts in the model and turning them on when you want them, and sometimes you miss something, right? So what Pedro's going to show you today is a much more streamlined, powerful, and easier to use version of this. So I'll stop sharing, and then Pedro can talk about, you know, what the next evolution of this is, which is available today, and we're going to continuously improve it. And over the next, you know, few weeks or a month or so, it'll start becoming default for all new users, and then you'll have the choice to make it default for yourself. And then at some point, it might just be always default for everyone. So go ahead, Pedro.
Okay, thank you, Javi, for that reminder. And I'm gonna start sharing my screen again. Okay, cool. So one thing that I want to show before we go into this is that for you to be able to access this new method, you have to click over here on your name, go into user preferences, scroll all the way down and turn on I usually suggest people to turn all of the experimental features on because it's where you're going to have access to the latest and greatest. And you can, but the most important one for this stage is the last one. They map to milestone for imported models. Okay, so that's the only way that you'll be able to use it. My list is a little bit smaller than everyone over there is because I'm using our environment, which is like that's showing like a little bit of more updated kind of like features. Okay. So let's start with that. So the first step is I have my model. I already placed this model in the right location. I have a drawing over here that helped me to place that model in the right location and so on and so forth, right? So I'm going to turn off this drawing for now and I'm going to focus on my model. The first thing that I'm going to do is to import a new schedule. So at this stage of the import schedule, what I usually suggest is that you try to filter those schedules in your native software first, just because it will make this screen over here a little bit more digestible. Sometimes not sometimes, most of the times, your schedule is going to have like 1,000 lines, 2,000 lines, a lot of tasks, right? So if you bring in an imported one, so a featured one is easier for you to visualize. So what I'm going to do over here is I'm going to select the mobilization stage. I'm going to select the bulk excavation stage. I'm going to bring in both the start and the end dates because what I mentioned before, I want to represent like the start date of a moment where like there's a big logistic change. So I'm going to start my excavation. So I would need to know what's going to be different at that stage. Okay. So bulk excavation stage 2 and detailed excavation. And then my foundations, I'm going to bring in the end date. Actually, yeah, the end date, slab on grade, suspended slab. So I'm going to just select a couple of these elements over here, right? So I'm going to get these dates. And then for my residential building, I'm going to get all the levels, right? So these steps over here. Okay. And once I'm done with that part, actually for my envelope, I'm going to bring in both because at this stage, I'm going to start creating like a place for deliverables that are going to come in that's more dynamic, right? So once I hit next, I can now visualize all the steps that of what I created over here. Depending on how your schedule is organized, you're going to have some warnings over here that will tell you what are the elements, like the milestones in which you have like the same date. Even though you can create milestones with the same date, we suggest that you don't, just because it is easier for you to organize them in the list. Okay, so if I apply these changes now, I'm going to create all my milestones automatically. So my milestone manager over here is showing me all the milestones. This project start date over here, the milestone that I am at, I'm going to just delete it for now. Actually, let's keep it over there. So now I have my milestones. Let's start like creating the steps, right? So coming back to this, my first step after I create my scheduling port is to do my initial milestones. So I'm not gonna do the existing conditions today. So I'm gonna work with my mobilization stage, right? So I'm gonna just drop in over here a couple of things like our fences. So let me find one, the construction site fence over here. Always work on 2D whenever you were doing sketches, right? Just to make sure that you're selecting the right points. For new users, you will see that your sketch will snap to the horizontal and vertical lines. So you can go over here in settings and turn the snapping feature off, right? So, but if you hold shift, you will still be working on increments of 45 degrees, okay? So when I confirm that, now I have my fence showing up over there, and I'm just gonna drop in like an office over here at this corner. So let's find a construction office. This container over here is fine. Cool. I can simply copy and paste over here to place more offices if I want. And I'm just gonna define where my deliverables are gonna come in. So my delivering stage, right? So I'm just gonna put in some arrows over here. Cool. So very quick, kind of like definition of where elements are. I could spend more time over here dropping resources from my mobilization stage, where I would put my tanks in, my loading areas, my labels and gates and whatnot. But that would take a little bit of time, so I'm gonna just go a little bit faster over here, right? So if I go next now on my bulk excavation stage, I want to replicate what's going on at this stage. I'm starting my excavation. So I don't want to see the models, right? I want to see what is the actual state of that construction. So I can hide these over here. And different from our legacy method, now this hide and show is temporary. So meaning that if I go back and forth, they are back, right? And we actually changing this in a couple coming weeks where like these temporary hide and shows will be persistent whenever you going back and forth with your milestones, right? And let's say that for my bulk excavation stage, the first one, I'm gonna actually use my drawing as my reference instead. And I'm gonna create one small excavation stage over here just to represent that this is the moment where I break ground, okay? So I'm gonna do a cleaning up of my site. That excavation is going to be created with a depth like a 3 meter depth by default. I'm just going to put like over here 1 feet, and at the stage I will put in like some heavy machinery over here, just any excavator basically, right? Just to show that this is the stage where I'm breaking ground. So my excavation stage, my bulk excavation stage number 2, finish. What I'm going to do, I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to duplicate that cut that I created beforehand. And then I'm going to bring this cut to my second stage over here, my second milestone, and put in a depth, I don't know, 15 feet, right? So if I want to know exactly how deep my building is supposed to go, I can now like bring the building back, and I can hide my terrain. But keep in mind that once I hide my terrain, what I'm looking is something like this. So this is what represents our excavation boundary. So if I want to see what is inside that excavation boundary, I can go over here in my model browser, site planning, and hide the excavation. So I can see exactly where my excavation is supposed to be. Okay. With my review tool, I can measure what is the total depth of this excavation. So I'm going to divide that into steps of like 20 feet and then 20 feet. Okay. So now bringing everything back, my terrain, I'm gonna clear this, and I'm gonna hide my model over here, and I can keep going forward. So another quick tip is that sometimes when you're doing this, your elements will be hovering, it will be floating like this in the air. Instead of you moving down, you can simply right click and say drop to surface, okay? But one thing that I want to remind for our previous workshop is that if I do that, if I drop the to surface, it will also do that same thing for my previous milestone. So I want you to define that this object over here has a movement that is dynamic. Okay, so I can have 2 different stages of positioning depending on the milestones. Okay, so let me go back forward over here. So now if I drop this guy to the surface, you will be able to see that in both milestones, they'll be different. Okay. Next stage, I'm gonna just finish that part of the excavation over here by duplicating that same cut, bringing it down, and then going over here and defining that my cut depth is gonna be 20 feet more, right? Actually, I'm counting from the top, so I'm gonna put in like total 40 feet. Cool. And then my excavator go down. I'm doing this super simple because that's not the focus for today. So I want to get to the point where we're going to start working our simulation, right? So for now, I'm going to ignore the detailed excavation state and let's work with our foundation state. Okay, so there's a lot of stuff going on my model over here that I'm not seeing, but I can either isolate my view, just like I did over here before with the terrain, so I can visualize all the parts of the model. Cool. So over here I can see everything. And let me just remove this at this stage. And now I can start selecting parts and putting them in the buckets of the milestones. Okay, so let's start with our excavation. Oh, sorry, our structure. So I'm gonna hide my model over here. And at this stage of the foundation, what am I working over here? I'm doing these foundation pads. So I'm gonna select either from the 3D view over here by holding control and selecting them. I can also hold control and drag to do a lasso selection, and then hold control and shift to deselect elements. And you see over here that I quickly selected all my foundation parts. Or I can go over here, and this is a great tip. You can go over here on your tool, on your tree structure, and if this is a IFC file, you can check what is the IFC class that these parts are classified as, right? So this one is classified as slab. It should be a footing, but for now it's a slab. So what I can do over here is going to my tree structure, going to class, and then filter everything by slab, right? So now only elements that are tagged as slabs will be showing over here in my tree. So if I hold shift and select them all, I'm only selecting things that are slabs. If I select the folder over here, I'm also selecting only things that are slabs, right? This filter over here is telling me that if I select anything from the tree, will only be slabs, and then you can select from the folders or not. Cool. So I'm gonna do what I'm gonna do right now is I'm gonna say that for the foundations, these are the parts that are gonna be executed at this stage. So I have 3 different ways that I can define that. One is right-clicking and saying begin from this milestone. The other one is using my shortcut Control B. So I'm gonna assign these parts to this milestone. And the third way is to go into the model editing, the model element editing, and then going into this timeline over here and saying, I want these parts to be attached to the foundation parts. So when I do that and I confirm, you see that if I go back, those parts are not there. If I go forward, these are the moments that they will show up. Even if I do a hide and show over here, this won't affect my sequence because now these parts are connected to this milestone. So the hide and show is temporary. Okay, so right now there's a what's happening is that I'm seeing all the parts in my view. I don't want to see all the parts in my view. So I just want to see the things that are changing, or I want to filter my view to select just specific parts, right? So one thing that you can do is either do a temporary hide and show like I did over here, or you can use our color coding, right? So the color coding, when you click over here, this will highlight the parts that you have in your model as none, past, current, or future. So none are all the parts that are not classified or not connected to any milestones. Past are parts that are on the past. Current is the parts that are being executed at this milestone, and future is the parts that are in the future. So for example, with this thing turned on, if I go back, you see that my foundations now are in the future because they're happening in the next milestone. If I go forward, they are highlighted as green because they are in this milestone. If I keep going forward, they are now highlighted as blue because they are in the milestone prior. Okay, so what I can do, I can click on none over here, and these will kind of like hide parts from my view, but it will keep that kind of like wireframe look over here. And this is just to show that like all of these parts are, I don't want to see that, right? So I can either keep the wireframe over here to use them as a reference, or I can go into my settings, graphics, and hide the building edges. So now these parts are gone. So I'm only seeing whatever is highlighted over here. So if I keep going back and forth, all of those parts that are tagged as none, I won't be able to see them because they are hidden from my view. If I turn them back on or turn my graphics over here with the building edges, I'll be able to see them. Cool. Again, at first this might seem a little bit too much. It's just because it's a different mindset from what we had before. So if you have any questions, please pop them on the QA or in the chat over here. We'll be happy to go through that. Okay, so let's go quickly over here. So I'm in my foundation stage, and I don't want to see my architectural model. So right now, what I did over here is that let me go to a different stage of it. Okay, cool. So let me turn the building edges, and then I'm gonna click on none. So right now, if I hide or show parts from here, again, let me clear my filter. If I hide or show parts from here, these are temporary hide and shows, right? Because everything is connected to my tree structure. Oh, sorry, to my milestones. So I'm gonna just go quickly through these parts over here and assign them, connect them to their milestones. And this is gonna be the moment where it's gonna take me a couple of times just because I'm gonna quickly do this assignments, right? So I'm gonna begin from this milestone because I want all of these parts to be done there. On P3 is what, that's it. Oh, I put everything in the wrong milestone over here. So I can hide this part now, and then say the suspended slab from my 2D view is going to be this one, right? So it's going to be executed at this milestone. So it's very quick for you to select these parts over here and then assign them for a milestone. Okay. So if I
Pedro,
everything,
can I cut you off? I have a question for you. So one thing you did there that I don't know if everyone saw is you unselected as well. Can you talk about using the unselect with the lasso? Because that's very helpful if you group something and then you got a part over here that you actually don't want. Can you show how you did that unselect?
Yes. So over here, I'm just highlighting my structure. So if I hold Control and select parts, and I accidentally selected parts over here that are in this lower level, now I can hold Control and Shift and unselect these parts. If I hold Control and click on these parts, I'll also unselect them, but the Control and Shift do a unselection lasso selection. Lasso unselection. Okay, cool. That's a mouthful. Yeah, so the way that I prefer to work, I usually work with these elements like turned off over here. And if my architectural model over here is something that I do not want to worry about this right now, I just want to focus on on the structure because these parts overlap with each other. So I don't want to keep hiding, showing them all the time. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go over here in my milestone manager, and I'm going to create a milestone that is way in the future over here. So I'm going to put in over here a placeholder. So this is a milestone that is a placeholder, and I'm going to define that it will be, I don't know, 2031 over here. So what I'm going to do at this stage, I'm going to take these parts and I'm going to assign these parts to that placeholder milestone because I want to remove them from my view because I'm going to work with my color sequencing over here. So coming back to the first stage, the slab on grade stage that I want to remove the future parts. So you see, if I deactivate the future now, I'm not looking at the milestone or at the architecture stuff, and I'm only focusing on my structure. Okay. So I'm seeing over here this slab grade on finish, and I can see also that I haven't not selected a couple of parts over here. So this is a great thing for you to identify where are parts that you haven't assigned to specific milestones. Okay. So going forward over here, my suspended slab, and then the next milestone is going to be my P1. So I'm going to select these parts over here. I can do that from my 3D view, or I can do that from my my model over here, my tree structure over here. So I'm going to be using my my tree structure from now on, because I know that this model is fairly well organized, so we don't need to worry about that much. And like, for example, if I keep clicking over here and I'm highlighting things in my view that I know that that I know what are the milestones that I should be putting them in, I can just go over here and say this guy is going to be on my structural rental finish over here, right? So I'm just going to place these elements on those stages. Actually, this is the structural rental. This over here is going to be on my P1. Cool. So these elements are like vanishing from my view because the future is turned off over here. Okay. So I can quickly see where are the parts that I have not yet like assigned to a milestone or something like that. So this one's over here. These will be put into the P1 structural rental. Okay. So I'm going to do this a little bit faster over here just so I can save some time. And I'm going to select these parts. I don't need to keep like hitting done over here all the time. Keeping this view open and selecting parts on my 3D or my 3 over here, it's already good enough. Like we already have that ability to quickly go through those steps, right? So I'm just assigning where the structure elements are. And then if I go over here in roof, I can go in and say, what is my structure for the roof over here? Cool. I'm going to do the same thing with the architectural model. The models are all in placeholder elements. There is a like a overlap over here. Like I don't need to bring in the parts for like the P3, P2, P1 because like I already have structure that shows over there. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go and edit this model and say, never show these parts because there is an overlap over here that I don't need to worry about this right now. Okay. And then I'm going to go into my first floor and then assign this to my envelope rental. The rental is just the fourth floor, okay, to finish. Cool. I could also go into the milestones in which they are going to be executed and then like select them over here, like say that this stage, envelope 2, I can right click, begin from this milestone, use my shortcut to go forward, right click, begin to this milestone, shortcut, select Control B as a shortcut, go forward, envelope roof, Control B, and then go forward, right? So now I have like a very interesting way to visualize what's going on in each one of these points in time. So let's go back over here to our first stage of our milestones, right? So the detail excavation is the last stage where like I'm not doing anything related to my model. So if I keep going forward over here, I have the foundations finish, slab on grade, suspended slab. I missed the P2 suspended slab over here, so I can just like turn on the feature and then visualize that part over there, where is it, and then assign this to this milestone. Very fast way for you to check if everything that you're doing is correct or not. Same thing for the P1 over here. So then when you go to structure level 2, level 3, the envelope rental start. So I haven't done anything because I want this milestone to capture the moment where I'm going to define the loading and the loading area, right? So where my trucks are going to park with the delivery for these parts and so on and so forth. Okay. Structure for level 4, envelope finish over here in the bottom. And then I have a structure roof over here that finished. Level 2, level 3, level 4, and the roof for the envelope. And then occupancy. Okay. So now if I turn on my color coding and I bring back my terrain and my excavation, my sequence is complete, right? So I can go back to my first milestone over here and visualize what's going on. So I'm going to use the shortcuts over here to go forward, and then I can see, oh, so these are the parts that I haven't assigned to any milestone. Remember that I saw that those over there. So I can simply hold Control over here and then put them onto a specific bucket. That's going to be this lab on grade. Okay. So now we have our foundation finish, our lab on grade finish. That this lab on grade is not showing up over here, probably because I did not select the proper parts. So if I put them in the feature, I can go over here and select this lab on grade and say begin from this milestone. Okay. So now this lab on grade is finished over there. Then I can move on with my suspended slab, everything for P1, then P2. Even over here, without the color coding, I can select parts of my slab on grade over here in like, sorry, not my slab on grade, but like the P1 suspended slab. And then from here, decide like what is exactly the milestone that they are supposed to be if they're in the wrong milestone. Okay, so moving forward over here, just like taking a quick review of my sequence, and I think that's it. Anything that you want to mention, Javi? So yeah, the placeholder milestone, now that I don't need it anymore, I can simply delete that.
I think that for those who've done some detailed model sequencing in the kind of the legacy way that I showed, it can be tricky, right? When you miss things and stuff like that. And you saw how easy it is that just to visually see it, flag it, start from this milestone, and connect the logical link between two. So I guess one thing I'd ask is, what, from a planning perspective, when do you think would be a good time if you're going to sequence this way to start bringing in the temporary resources, right? The means and methods to visualize, okay, against, now that I've sequenced the work, would you suggest to go back now and say, okay, let's start putting in our temporary resources and planning as you go? Or, maybe you can talk a bit about that.
Yeah, so there's something that I did wrong over here. I'm just like fixing this part. So P1, just that we're in the wrong milestone that I selected accidentally. That's why this new method is so good, because you can check that and like visualize all of these small errors at any point in time and just go back and forth without doing the hide and show, because it's very like I'm connecting these parts to that milestone. So very excited about it. Okay, so reviewing our sequence over here, that's the moment we'll, like Javi mentioned, where I'm gonna start bringing like these temporary resources and so on and so forth, right? So that's my personal preference. I prefer to create the sequence first and then figure out how I'm going to build that, right? So I created, coming back from this, I created my model sequence, I created my excavation step. Now I'm going to populate that with resources, right? So usually on the detail excavation stage is where you bring in your crane. So before, it was a little bit harder with the legacy method for you to put the crane at this stage, because if you want to see what is the shape of your model, but you don't want to adjust this to change the sequence. So right now I can simply put in turn my model with the temporary show, and I can see what is the shape of that model, and I can plan with this, but I'm working on my detail excavation milestone. And even though I'm seeing these parts on my screen, I haven't changed the sequence, right? So I can now go into my resource over here, go into my equipments, cranes, put in like a crane over here, and you utilize that, right? So this way I can quickly scrutinize to see if parts of this model is okay or not without having to change the sequence. Cool. So we'll put the crane over here, then adjust the crane. And then to adjust this crane over here, my method is to place the crane where I think it should go initially, go into the 2D view, turn on my resource coverage envelope so I can see the coverage of that crane. That resource coverage envelope is following the hook. So I'm going to extend my hook to a point where I think it's going to cover all the corners of my building. And then I'm going to adjust the jib length to be the next option after this hook limit over here, right? So this is the minimum that I can go with this crane, with this length over here. So I cannot go less than that, but I can go higher, right? So that's for this project, we just need like a smaller configuration of this crane and bring in the height over here. The height is, I'm not gonna define this right now. I just bring it down, but I need to check if the crane has been placed correctly according to the ground, right? So if I go back over here, you see that the crane, when I move it down, I didn't put it in the way that it would be exactly on the ground. So I'm just gonna drop this to the surface, and now I can adjust the height over here using the limits of my model, right? So I can define what are the clearances and whatnot. So probably because of this little tower over here, I'm gonna need to bring this over, and I can even simulate what will be the clearance that I'm gonna have with that height at that location over there, right? So I'm gonna place this guy over here, bringing my hook to this elevation, and looking from the 3D, I can, sorry, I'm moving my 3D view over here too fast. I can click on my hook and see, okay, with the hook at this height over here, I have a clearance of like 26 feet below the jib. Cool. For this area. Yeah, so now that I put in this crane over here, I put it at the detail finish, detail excavation stage, right? So this crane will show up from that, by default, will show up from that milestone onwards. And then I can quickly check my view over here and how that would interact with the rest of my sequence. Okay. Can see right away that there is a little clash over here, so probably I would move the screen outside to clear this structure. Is that good?
That's great. Yeah. So you get the idea. Similar to what I've done for a lot of you in demos, you would start with the same kind of sequence of the model, and then start putting apply your site logistics planning. You know, if you need traffic management, all the different phases of the construction, and just link those to milestones as well. And so just say, hey, crane shows up on the crane mobilization milestone, and it leaves on the crane demob, right? The same idea.
Yeah.
And it'll state everything in between. I guess another thing too about the schedule, you want to talk about how this would make schedule sync and model sync a little nicer. We can talk about that.
Sure. So once I'm done with my sequence over here, there are two things that are connected, right? So my schedule is connected to created in my milestones, and my milestones are connected to the schedule, right? So if I go over here, my milestone manager, I can see that every single task, that milestone that I have over here, is paired with a task in your schedule. If I have a new version of that schedule, I can go over here in my project setup, imported schedule, and click on this little button and say update with new schedule. So that new version will apply new dates to each one of those tasks, and those dates will be updated over here automatically. So if there's any schedule changing in the middle of your project, you can bring that schedule over here and everything will be updated. Same thing with the model, right? So that schedule change will define just like what are the new dates for the milestones that you created already, okay? And for the model, if you go over here, imported model, and for the structure or the architecture, you want to replace that with a new version, you can click over here and click on update with new model. So what's going to happen over here? So let me do one as an example over here. So I'm going to replace my architectural model number 2 with the architectural with like another version of the same file. And once this starts to it will upload a new version, right? And it will take some time to convert. And once that's converted, I will be exposed to a window that will ask me to review the changes that are happening between model A and model B. So what is that we are comparing? We are comparing the tree structure over here. So these are the two models that I have available. And this tree structure over here is defined by the source CAD software in which this model was created. And if there is like a big change, we won't be able to retain a lot of the sequencing. But if the changes that you're doing are not like that major or anything like that, I'm talking about the changes in the tree structure. Okay, the geometry itself will be updated and everything will be updated. But if there are, like, for example, over here, if I review this view over here will expose to me what are the new part, how many new parts are added, how many of parts will be removed, and the unchanged parts. So everything that is unchanged over here, we can keep the sequence, we can retain the sequence. But everything that is new, you will need to add to connect those parts to the milestones again. Okay. So that's the process over there. Cool. Is it okay if we move forward over here? We only have 10 minutes.
Again, there's questions. We can hang out a little bit after, Pedro and I. So if someone wants to hang out and ask a couple questions, but feel free to pop in the QA if you have any questions. We'll go from there. Keep going.
Yeah. So I just want to touch base on like how you can sequence other elements in your scenario. So we are kind of like trying to move everything to be in the same consistent way for you to define a start and an end date, right? So over here, like resources, labels, zones, and simple massing already have that timeline definition, right? So you define what is going to be the first milestone that you're going to see that, and the last milestone that you're going to see that. Detail massing, we are doing like a revamp of the detail massing to right now as we speak. So you still need to use the legacy method where you hide and show things from the 3D view or from the tree structure as you go. But there's a new version coming soon in the theater close to you. Who put this in over here? And the last one is the excavation. I'm getting a lot of questions about how to remove an excavation at some point in the future whenever you're done with your excavation. So for example, let's say that at this stage, on the last stage over here, my occupancy stage, I want to remove my excavation. So in cmBuilder, you don't have the concept of removing an excavation stage because you are actually replicating the actions that you're going to have in real life, right? So you're going to create cuts and you're going to create fills and whatnot. So if I remove a cut at like milestone, my occupancy milestone is going to remove that cut from the previous milestones as well, right? So what you're seeing in each milestone is a sum of all the steps that you created. So bottom line, for you to remove an excavation in the end, you have to create a fill. So you go over here in the occupancy stage, and then you create a fill to represent that you're gonna fill your hole at some point. You can either draw the fill or you can go over here and say create a fill from this cut, right? So a fill will be created automatically using that same cut shape, right, in the same cut height. And then I'm gonna go and drag this fill over here to my occupancy milestone. So if I drag this down, let me put it over here. And then I'm gonna put this on my occupancy milestone. So it means that now if I go to the last milestone, the hole has been filled, but on the previous one, it hasn't, right? So that's the idea. If you don't want to fill like the interior area of your terrain, you can create a fill only for the surroundings. Okay. Awesome. So the next step over here is tips and tricks, right? So we've gone from some of these already, but like I just want to highlight that the color coding feature is a really amazing tool for you to really visualize what's going on, and it's more to help you edit the sequence other than like present this to someone. You can still use it to present this to someone, but it's more targeted for you to help you create the sequence fast, right? The IFC filtering, so use this as much as you can, just because it's easier for you to select the same elements from the same class or from the same level from here, but this requires that these elements are correctly tagged and classified on your original file. And the new shortcuts that we have, right? So if you go over here in key shortcuts, you can visualize the new shortcuts. The milestone navigations is probably the ones that are more relevant for today. So going back and forth on the milestone is just using your arrows, right? Going to the first and last milestone, you can use Control and the arrows. Begin and end from this milestones, Control B, Control E, and opening the milestone, Control M. One caveat about the new sequencing method is that if you have parts to be demolished on your models that you are importing, you shouldn't use the new method yet, right? So we are going to change that, and this is going to be available really, really soon. Like I think it's 1 or 2 weeks from now, because we don't have yet like a remove date for like the geometries that are imported. Okay. And the bonus tip is to hide a beauty and edges to control the wireframe view, right? So this view over here that I mentioned, but just maybe interesting to show it again. So if I do a feature and then show the building edges, I'm gonna see this wireframe view over here. So if you don't want to see those parts, you can just go and turn this on and off. Another thing is that contextual menus are really helpful for you to understand what can you do and what you can't do, right? So if I do a right click over here, I can see a lot of things about this contextual menu. If I'm moving, rotating, snap aligning, or locking my model, this is going to be applied to the whole model, not just that part. So if I move this, it will move the whole model, not just the part that I selected, right? So you see over here that I'm moving the whole thing. Okay. Just gonna undo that little shaking on the model over there. The excavation and terrain height, already covered that part. Just like knowing that the terrain and the excavation boundary are different things. The one is controlled by the tree, and the other one is controlled from your view settings. And just showing a little bit about the new features that we have. Other this whole thing related to the milestone mapping is the resource QTO, right? So I'm gonna go over here in a finished scenario that has a lot of resources. You can go over here and share, export a resource QTO, and this will create an Excel file that will show a little bit of like all the resources that you have on your site. Is a very big kind of file that it shows the resources that you have, the quantity. If they are linear resources, you're going to be seeing like the whole quantity over here. And there is like a little summary of the linear resources over here towards the end. So this is great for construction fences and whatnot. It's going to be exported one using the units that you have at the moment, right? So right now my units are in feet. So when I export this, you see over here, they will be in feet. And the lengths that you see over here, they are duplicated. It's just showing like what is the length of that element in each one of these milestones. My milestones are listed over here on the top. Okay. And the second thing is like minor ones, the project tags. So if I open over here, my view, we now have these concept of the project tags. So for you to define for your team, what is the status of that project? If it's a draft, it's something that you're bidding on, if you're planning that work because you already got awarded, if it's in construction, or if it's it's already completed. Cool. So I sorry this took a little bit longer than I was expecting. So let's open the questions over here for QAs, and I'm gonna put in a little form over here on the chat. So if Amir, can you turn the chat on, please? Just so
yeah, you should be able to.
Yeah, because the chat is disabled.
Can you? I think we can make it so that you can do the chat. We had killed the chat.
Yeah, we killed the chat.
maybe we should have the chat perhaps with the
Yes.
Oh, there you go. Try it now.
You good?
Oh, it says it's been turned on, but I still can't see the chat. Teams for the L.
Come on, Teams.
Come on, Teams.
Yeah. I'm gonna put it over here on the QA. I think that everyone can see that question, so you can.
So. Oh, there you go. Try now. Try now.
Okay, cool.
You should be able to drop it in there.
Okay, cool. So just a little form over there on the chat, so you guys can provide a little bit of insights on like specific things that we want to answer right now. But we're just gonna stay around for like a couple minutes more for the QA. So if anyone has any questions, we'll be happy to go through them.
One thing, Pedro, if you go back to your scenario, one thing for everyone, as you're working, and you don't want to worry about the graphics too much, but I always like to say at the very end, once you've spruced it up, you can start adding ambient occlusion and like everything before your final presentation. Between the client, getting by environmental lighting, you put in their surrounding buildings, and you can kind of dress it up a little nicer, play around. Depending on what the model is, you can start playing with the graphics and make it look nice. So so I always like to suggest that just go up to settings, graphics, and display, and you can play around with those things. View angles, right? You can kind of change the isometric view angles and play around with the look. And no other questions? If we'll stick around, but yeah, thanks Pedro, great job, and thanks everyone for joining. And we'll send you the recording, but if you can take a few minutes and fill out that form, that'd be great. And we'll let you know when we have the next one.
Yeah. So the view, the visibility kind of angles is good for you to
Yeah,
visualize
for
like
inside the
enclosed
building.
space.
Yeah.
Yeah. So like for example, by default, this is what we do, like 50 degrees. But if you want to see more about the whole room, you can just go and expand like this.
Okay, I was gonna make my joke about asking for help on using bespoke or using obscure former movie names as part of our workshop naming. I'm not sure if anyone's
Ah,
noticed this.
you shouldn't give the
Every
spoiler
every
alert.
every resource, every site, all at once.
You shouldn't give the spoiler alert. I was expecting that someone would in the future would just like, I see what you guys are doing. You know, with the names of the webinars.
Yeah, I wish that someone would give us some love. We're like, oh, I see what you did there. Butterfly effect. Come on now.
I think we're good.
I think we're
Okay.
good. Okay, everyone,
Yes.
thank you so much. Have a great day, and we'll send this recording out to you so you have it in case you want to share with anyone else in your team.
Bye.
Okay, bye.